Hello guys, welcome back to my channel. I hope you're all doing well. So recently I saw this amazing video essay by Chronicles of X here on YouTube called Kara's Story is a Complete Failure. And he really nicely goes through a lot of the different ways that Quantic Dream really let Kara down, her and Alice, especially in relation to the other main characters' narratives, the variety of choices you get with them, and the actual sort of morals and messages that Connor and Markus are exemplary of. And it just got me thinking of all the different ways that Quantic Dream could have improved that story, Kara and Alice's relationship, and their individual story arcs. When it comes to the relationship between Kara and Alice, I think the major thing we're lacking is tension between the two of them within their own relationship. I find the majority of the time that there's drama, it's tension that Kara and Alice are feeling together against someone or something else, but the basis of a great relationship between characters is overcoming tension between themselves. Like, what can they disagree on? At the start of the game, Alice can only really be quiet or slightly warm to us. And so, in this situation, adding tension, what if she could actually be mean to us? Or, not slightly warm, but legitimately excited based on what you do as Kara. Despite the fact that Alice actually does speak up against things that Kara does sometimes, Kara asks Alice to trust her a lot, and she always just sort of does. I wonder what a storyline could have been where she truly doesn't trust you, which means either your sort of relationship bar goes down, or Alice's distrust in you could help Kara realize her decision was the wrong thing to do. Like, I think in this instance, obviously they were coming out basically at the same time, but I would have liked to see a little more of sort of a Sean and Daniel from Life is Strange thing in that case. Because while I have my own problems with that game, the actual, morality mechanic is stellar. And I think they do a really good job of having Daniel genuinely be changed and affected based on your behavior, particularly him witnessing things that you do, whether they're good or bad. And I feel like even though Alice sort of spends a lot of time saying, we shouldn't do that, or we should do this, or whatever, that doesn't really have a lot of bearing on her actual dialogue, place to place. She tells Kara not to steal in the Fugitives chapter, but that never really comes back up in any meaningful way. And I think it would be interesting if maybe by doing that, she was influenced to steal herself. I'm pretty sure something like that actually does happen in Life is Strange too. But, if we were able to see a relationship between Kara and Alice that when Alice is, quote unquote distant, she's actually maybe more aggressive or upset, I'd be interested to see how that goes down at Zlotko's. Do you truly preserve your own self-interest and go, which makes Alice distrustful? And then, of course, everything at Zlotko's happens. Do you leave and, never get to Luther? They get in a fight about the decision to go to Zlotko's before they do. And then once everything is over, they can really, come together and closely bond when Kara realizes she made the wrong decision and Alice has a good head on her shoulders and, maybe she says, I'm going to try to listen to you more in the future. I also wonder if making the Zlotko chapter a little bit longer temporally would have helped with that. The Fugitives chapter into On the Run go on for a little bit longer, they go on for night into the day. And I wonder if, they have a fight before Zlotko's, they get to Zlotko's, everything seems normal, they go to sleep, and then Zlotko tries to, brainwash Kara and whatever. If having a little bit more space would allow for a real fight or an argument to breathe. Again, in the sort of influencing Alice thing, there are no moments where Alice gets to go psycho. Again, we certainly get that with Daniel, we see that with Ellie, with David at the end of the first Last of Us. I wonder, what if someone was threatening Kara and Alice, fucking kills them? And I wonder if, Kara allows her to continuously be growing up in a place where she has to commit these acts of violence. Why wouldn't Alice feel like she's able to do that as well? And, I just mentioned Ellie. I think Joel and Ellie are another good touchstone for how I would improve the relationship between the two of them. They're forging a parent-child bond in treacherous and new circumstances, where these two characters have incredible chemistry, but they don't always see eye to eye. And Like Chronicles of X said in his video, Kara and Alice's journey is fundamentally a road trip story, and Joel and Ellie and Sean and Daniel are on their own road trips. But in general, I wish we saw Kara make Alice happy more often. You can get her a toy in the supermarket, and I don't remember it ever really coming up past just giving it to her that first time. What if that was a meaningful exchange? What if it wasn't and she actually hates that doll or wanted a different doll or whatever? And I just wish that Kara and Alice had inside jokes or funny stories or particular memories to look back on. Even people in the darkest scenarios find time to laugh. And I think that really could have humanized the two of them and just made their dynamic feel more real. Similarly, like people give kids nicknames, kids give people nicknames, you know? What if Alice had a nickname for Luther, or if Kara had a nickname for Alice? And in general, I mean, how little do we actually know about Alice, right? What are her favorite foods? What's her favorite story? What are her hobbies, her catchphrases? What's her favorite school class? What are her favorite memories, etc., etc.? Obviously, growing up in a disadvantaged and abusive household means that you may not have access to all of the same outlets for things like this that normal kids do. But I don't think being in that situation stops every child from having an imagination, from being creative or being active. And I wish we had just been able to see a little bit more about Alice's, individual quirks. Speaking of favorite foods, can someone fucking feed her something that's not spaghetti? And I've mentioned The Last of Us a couple times, but I haven't mentioned Yara, Lev, and Abby in The Last of Us Part 2. But the ways that Yara and Lev don't know puns and lingo and all of this sort of new world stuff is a fun way for Abby to be able to connect with them. And I feel like there's either something that could have been done here like that, whether it comes to Alice being a child or, Kara being an android and not knowing the general human slang of the time. Like in Pirate Cove, we get this little, conversation between the two of them where Alice asks for a story and then Kara's like, I have 9,000, children's stories in my brain. And she's like, no, make up a story. And so obviously she ends up, making up a story about Alice and whatever. But I think that's a really nice moment that we don't get a whole lot of before or after that. And a few more moments like that are really what I'm talking about to sort of really start to round out their personalities past these traumas that are affecting them in the moment. One of the ways that the game, tries to show us that Alice and Kara are connecting are by Alice very consistently talking about family and just wanted to be a family and why, can we be a normal family? And very particularly here, if we had known Alice was an android earlier and we had gotten to Jericho earlier, I think that's a place where you can really show that different types of families can exist in a multitude of ways. And if you know Alice is an android sooner, you can choose whether or not to treat her like an android or like a human child, either physically, with temperature or food, or emotionally. Because if she wants a family, you can let her know all the androids are her family because she is one. And on that note, it's kind of insane to me, but we never really get to see Kara and Alice actually talk about the fact that she's an android. What if Kara could express her frustrations, but ultimately she either realizes their love is just as strong, if not stronger, or doesn't and she fucking abandons her. And Alice can clarify things like if she fucking knew if she was an android or not, and how she feels about the fact that her dad bought her to replace a real child. It's just kind of insane to me that we never actually really have that sit down. And again, that's something that would be a lot easier to do and do consistently and naturally if that's revealed earlier in the game. And so obviously Kara and Alice's goal is to get across the border to Canada, but wouldn't it be nice to actually know what their plan is once they get there? What is Kara's dream exactly? What's Alice's? Does Kara want to be a gardener, a rock star, a teacher? Does she want to have Luther work and be a stay-at-home mom? Does she want to write a memoir and live off the movie deal? Does Alice want friends? Does she want a nice room? Does she want to play outside? Does she want to learn a musical instrument? I literally have no fucking idea because they never discuss it. And if they really have no idea, then let's hear them hash it out. Brainstorm, give each other ideas so we can learn a little bit more about their individualities. So speaking of individualities, let's talk a little bit more about Alice. One of my biggest qualms about Alice is the fact that we rarely see any negative trauma responses from her that's not just the sort of saying, why didn't he love me over and over again? And I think that's something that Again, if we got to spend a little bit more like downtime with Alice and Kara, we could have seen through play, because a lot of children in abusive situations aren't really able to, communicate and disclose what's happening with their vocabulary at the time. And so both in general life and in therapy, the people around them can observe how they play and use that to understand what's going on with them at the time. And I feel like that's something we really could have gotten with Alice, whether it's, I know we kind of did with the drawings, but again, this is something I would have liked to see consistently throughout, especially like if she has that one like fox doll that she brings everywhere, give it some traits. Let's see her use it. Maybe we'll see her hit it or something. One of the other things I think is really interesting about Alice in the start that we don't get throughout the rest of the game is the fact that she's selectively mute. She basically refuses to speak to Kara or Todd unless she like physically has to. And that's something I would have loved to see throughout the rest of the game. Like, what if at a moment of crisis, she won't talk to you or anyone else, and you're only able to get her to talk if you have a good relationship with her? Or, to the extreme, she can never speak at all unless you have a good relationship with her. I'm also surprised that she never has any night terrors or trouble sleeping. In general, I think she could have been a lot more like Daniel from Life is Strange 2. While a lot of people, he's one of their least favorite parts of the game, he was one of my favorites in the sense that I thought he was an incredibly accurate portrayal of a young child having to go through something this dramatic. And again, disclosing that through play, being more aggressive with his actions because of it, not being able to articulate his feelings and not understanding what to do with that. Whereas Alice is like a little sage. What child is articulating themselves this well and this succinctly immediately after witnessing something so traumatic? I think maybe one of the ways you could get around that is by making Alice a little bit older, and she could also have more opinions on the world around her and, decision making along their journey. But one of the things that always really irks me around Alice is the fact that we never really get clarification on her feelings towards Todd. And, depending on what they are, that really changes your read on her reaction to running away from him or having to kill him. If she does love him, maybe she's in a kind of Stockholm syndrome-y, Roman Roy to Logan situation and hates Kara at first because she took her away from her dad and from her normal life, even if it was horrible. My favorite ending of the Stormy Night level is when Alice kills Todd. It really gives the abused child being forced to step up and protect the battered wife thing. I'd love to literally see her reckon with any of that whatsoever, whether positively or negatively. Switching gears for a sec, the whole Alice in Wonderland metaphor. In the first chapter, we get a couple of different mentions of Alice in Wonderland from Kara in the book and her name and whatever. But I mean, does Alice ever use the story to help contextualize her events? Who is the White Rabbit, Mad Hatter, Queen of Hearts? I just feel like if you're gonna make such an explicit thing about that at the start, that has to have some sort of weight throughout. And again, in terms of like being a child and trying to conceptualize things that are mature and traumatic, it's much easier to do that if you have a story that you love to, help guide you through it. And I'm not really sure Alice in Wonderland is the perfect one here. I don't know what is. The first thing that keeps coming to mind for me is Narnia. That isn't something that involves a lot of parent-child relationships, even though it does relate to, the concept of found family. But I feel like the idea of sort of mirroring or making Alice's story parallel to a fable or a book that she loves actually would have worked really well if they had done it for real. Alice doesn't have any particularly childish beliefs either, these sort of childish magical beliefs. And, side note, Kara doesn't really have any overtly logical android beliefs either, things that we see Connor sort of deal with. Back to Alice being an android, everybody's favorite topic. And personally, I think we should have found out about Alice at Slotco's. And on top of everything else I said before, it would make a lot of other moments where Alice is sort of reckoning with android liberation feel a lot more meaningful. Like when she goes to see the dying android at Rose's. But that brings up another question, what does Alice think of other androids? Does she even know she's an android? And if she does, is it weird to her being with these guys, or does it feel more normal to her than life with Todd? Let her express that and see how Kara would react to it. And like, we also see other child androids at Jericho. Like, there's also a little male one on top of the one that looks like Alice. I would have loved to be able to see Alice interact with them. In a way, you can chalk Alice being so fucking one note up to the fact that she's not a deviant. But that doesn't make okay the fact that deviant Kara is also so one note. So let's talk a little bit about Kara herself then. I brought it up before, but like, what does Kara really want with a fresh start? Does she want a normal human life? Or something else? And I think the fundamental question here, who is her priority in the future? Is it Alice or is it herself? Like, again, Chronicles of X talks about it in his video essay. The only time she really ever talks about these like wants is when she's on the boat, but it's a very general answer. And so, like, does Kara really want to be a mother? Or is it just in her programming? Which is like a really good metaphor for societal expectations around motherhood. And I wish that we heard more from Kara about being Alice's mother. Like, we generally hear her say a few positive things about how she loves her or wants to protect her, but that's not all a mother feels. She feels the greatest love in the world, but sometimes her child drives her to be crazier than ever. She's afraid for them to be in the world, but wants them to succeed. Sometimes mothers wish they weren't mothers, wish their children were different, wish they were different, are victims of circumstance and force cycles onto their kid. And I'd like to see Kara really rub up with the idea of motherhood as a state of being, rather than just a job title. A lot of women are great housewives. They can cook and clean and dress well and know all the right things to say. But when it really comes down to it, they're terrible mothers. And what if Kara was like that? A Stepford wife having to take care of a traumatized child? That she's exemplary of this idea that you can know everything, but not feel it. And so if we went down that route more, you could use the other characters that Kara comes in contact with to allow her to talk about it. And like, Rose and Luther could even admonish Kara for how she treats Alice if she treats her badly. I wish we could have a bigger, more personal conversation with Rose and talk about Kara's qualms around motherhood, maybe even ask for knowledge about motherhood from Rose, or ask Rose for knowledge about deviance from someone who's been harboring them. And I don't really have a place for it, but I feel like this is as good as any. I love the character of Luther. While I think there's probably something more that could have been done with him himself, I'm not really sure what it is, but I've always been a little surprised that we never got like a real romance route between him and Kara. It's like, you know, North and Markus can like fucking touch hands and they'll be like lovers. But Luther and Kara really seem to have each other's backs and really care about each other, especially if they're fleeing to Canada as, you know, being a family for Alice. Why not make explicit the romantic implications that gives around Kara and Luther? And as always, give a choice not to, but give a choice to. But I think in general, I really would have liked Kara to be a lot more like the tech demo character that inspired her and the Detroit Become Human game as a whole. What if Kara's goal was to become human and not just be Alice's mother? And so, like Connor or Markus having sort of two really distinct paths, Kara's distinct paths, you could either leave Alice in the lurch for Kara's own self-understanding, or sacrifice learning more about herself to take care of Alice. Which, you know, back to the metaphor thing, is another really nice metaphor to the plight of real motherhood. Aren't those two paths what every woman is trying to do when they're a mom? You know, how to be yourself and be a mom at the same time. But I just wish that if Kara is so interested in the idea of becoming human and wants to learn more about the world, I wish she looked for answers a little more. That she was, you know, critical of Cyberlife or Kamski, or, you know, was even able to talk to people more at Jericho. And we get a little bit of her like watching the news and stuff, but I wish we got a little bit more of Kara learning about androids' rights protests as the story goes on. And if we're, you know, going down this direction, maybe she can even choose to go to one and leave Alice with Luther or Rose or alone in the motel to protest. Maybe she could even get killed there or find out Alice is an android earlier there. And like, you know, in Fugitives, she talks to the guy about Slotco, but what if you could decide to just go there then, to the detriment of Alice? all of this could possibly bring Kara to Jericho a lot quicker, which would mean she may be around for things like the Stratford Tower or, other Jericho plans. And so my sort of darkest idea here centers around, sort of taking the most evil options, because we really get like an evil Connor arc if we want it. But anytime that you let Alice die, either you die or you stop playing. And I would have been really interested to see a couple of storyline permutations where you could play longer when you don't protect Alice or when you fail at Zlakos. If Alice were to die at the hands of Todd, but somehow Kara survives, could you even, have a version in there where Kara's regret at letting Alice die causes her to become a deviant in a much angrier, more Markus violent revolution way? And I know technically there is that, quote unquote, save yourself option in Crossroads that can lead to abandoning Alice at the android camp. But I'd want to explore or, spend more time with that guilt and regret than just that one secret cutscene. How would she feel by the end that she gained sentience or helped to gain this victory for her people, but in doing so, lost a child that could have had a future in this world? I think that's something that would have been really interesting to reckon with. And technically we have a lot of options to do that because there are a pretty decent number of times that Alice can die and Kara can't. Kara has the fewest chapters, the fewest story permutations, half the cast pronounces her fucking name wrong, and I feel like her story runs the least parallel to anyone else's. There's a lot of Connor and Markus interweaving. We don't get much more of that with Kara past On the Run and seeing Markus at the end. But when it comes to how she's treated in relation to the other protagonists of the game, basically everything I'm asking for here, we've already seen with Connor and Hank. They're two characters that rub up against each other at first, and you can choose to stoke the flame or try to be friends. Hank is traumatized and takes it out on Connor, and each character truly changes based on the other. We get casual downtime moments with Hank and Connor. The I like dogs section, Russian roulette, and we hear a lot about Hank's interests. Connor tries to appeal to Hank by talking about music or talking about sumo. And like I said before, when it comes to like the relationship bar that we have with everyone, Hank and Connor's relationship status really, really matters. And Hank can treat Connor very differently depending on the choices that you've made. And I would have liked to see a little more of that in Kara's relationships. I just wanted to explore a variety of ways that their dynamic could have been improved, and I think pretty simply as well, which is the thing that's the saddest about all of this. Their story had so much potential, and not like I think we're gonna see, a remake or a sequel to this anytime soon, but I hope in the next David Cage game, if there even is one, the weight of the protagonists can be balanced a little more equally. Because Detroit Become Human should be Kara's story, and it's not. That'll about do it for today. Chronicles of X, if you're watching this, hope you enjoyed. I can really rarely think of a flawed game I like to talk about more than this one, so please leave suggestions, especially, Detroit Become Human related suggestions for videos in the comments. I'll be very interested to hear what you guys have to say about this just in general. I got a whole lot of little things cooking right now, so stay tuned. Enough of the chatter. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like and subscribe. Maybe even put that bell on, get a notification every time I post. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.